I work at ECIP, the European Center for International Political Economy, which is a think tank specialized on trade policy. And I'm specifically working on digital trade policy. And since 1 year, I'm looking into data localization issues. And that's going to be actually the topic of my presentation today. And I'm looking more broadly also into Industry 4.0, 3D printing, and all these new technologies which are coming today in the market and shaping the economy today. And also on the side, I'm also a founder of an NGO for promoting digital education in Sicily, where I come from. So I'm not specifically specialized on cloud computing, but data localization is really pertinent with cloud computing because it's about moving, being able to move data across the borders, and it's the heart of what cloud computing is doing. So first of all, let's talk about the definition of what data localization is. Data localization is a buzzword that a lot of people are hearing, but it's not really clear what it is about. So thanks to a research that we did on over 60 countries all over the world, which are implementing this kind of policies, we came up with a definition of data localization, which is a government-imposed restriction to store data and to localize data within a certain jurisdiction. And I say jurisdiction because this restriction can come not only from a government, but also from a region within a certain country, as it is the case in Canada, for example, where there are data localization rules for certain regions. And this data localization differs from other administrative requirements, such as the requirement of the data subject to access the data, of the right to be forgotten, or the requirement to appoint a data protection officer, because data localization is intrinsically about the movement of data from one country to another. So that's the difference between all the other requirements on protection and privacy. This is about creating virtual barriers to the internet. And looking at data localization all over the world, we have came up with a list of these measures, which cover more than 100 instances, and we are going to soon publish a database with these measures. And we came up with a definition and a categorization, as you can see. So basically, data localization can be divided between strict data localization, which is a direct imposition to keep data within a jurisdiction. So, for example, local storage requirement, local storage and processing, and ban to transfer. And also conditional flow regime, which results in the localization of data within the territory of the country. If you have the question, like later on, I can clarify further. But just to give some examples, local storage requirements are, for example, requirements that some governments impose on accounting records of companies. For example, the German government or the Swedish government are requiring companies to keep a copy of accounting data within the territory of the country, so then they can be easily accessed by the authorities. And so as long as the company keeps a copy of the data within the country, then it can process the data outside this country. Local storage and processing is much more, creates much bigger burden on the company, because the company does not only have to keep a copy of the data within the country, but also has to process this data within the country. And an example of these measures is the new amendments that have been imposed in Russia in September 2015 on the personal data law. And according to these amendments, all companies that operate in Russia have to localize the data in Russia, process the data in Russia. And actually, I have here the specific wording. Basically, they say that data operators are required to ensure that the recording, systemization, accumulation, storage, uploading, change and retrieval of personal data of Russian citizens is made using database located within the territory of Russia. So that's quite strict requirement. And stricter than this can be a total ban to transfer data, such as the bans that we have in Australia for health data. And if there are these kind of bans, basically the company cannot transfer even a copy of the data outside the borders of the implementing jurisdiction. Conditional flow requirements instead are the ones that we encounter, for example, in Europe, both with the directive on data, personal data, and with the GDPR. And basically, when there is this regime, companies are required to abide by certain rules if the data needs to leave the territory of the country. So a lot of countries are implementing these data localization laws recently, And there is a clearly increasing trend of imposition of data localization measures. And this graph is the first attempt to show the results of our research in the database. And this covers only strict data localization measures and only those measures for which we have a clear date of entry into force. And you can see that after the beginning of the 21st century, the implementation and imposition of these rules has been skyrocketing. And before this increase, the only country that was really imposing data localization was China. And the excuse that often governments give to impose data localization is that data localization increases the security of data. And this is something that is a misconception, is a myth, because the security of data is not a function of where the data is actually located. The data, if the data is located in one specific country, it can be anyway accessed, transferred, copied, sent to any other country. And actually, if you localize the data in one specific country, actually the harm that can be done by hackers is actually increased because you are increasing the scale of possible harm that basically by localizing the data, you have all data like in one single jurisdiction, and therefore it's easier for hackers to access them or to modify them or create security concerns. Also, the security is also directly correlated with the amount of cybersecurity experts that you have in one country. So if developing countries, for example, impose to localize data in their country, it might be harder for the company to find cybersecurity specialists that can ensure that this data is actually secure. So as I was saying, basically, like the fact that the data are stored somewhere doesn't mean that actually they cannot be accessed from abroad. And actually, by localizing the data in one country is actually easier for the government that imposed this measure to access this data. So this data localization does not only fail to prevent foreign surveillance, but it also increases the chance that your own government is surveilling your own data, which is something that we think is only a problem of China, but actually there are countries in the EU which are recently have imposed some such laws, such as Germany, France, and the UK. So we don't have to underestimate also this problem. And at eCybe, we have done several analyses on the cost of data localization. We have created a model based on a CGE model called GTAP 8, the model that we used. And with this model, we have basically estimated the cost for the economy of implementing data localization measures. And we have done two simulations in two scenarios. The scenario of the result of the cost on the economy if certain legislation which is proposed actually enters into force. And that's the case of the EU. When we did the study, there was the GDPR, which was proposed. And also the scenario of full data localization. And as you can see in this graph, the results are quite worrisome. And for the EU, there will be a loss of up to 1.1% of GDP if full data localization is implemented. Thanks to this model, we can also analyze more specifically the impact on investment. And that's the results for investment. And again, there is a significant loss for all the countries that implement such policies. And I'm without glasses, so I have to check my graph here. So that's the graph on exports. And actually, that's a quite interesting graph because, as we can say, we were saying before, the cloud services and internet services in general are the backbone of all our businesses, not just service exports, don't just service like a sector in general, but also manufacturing sector. And in fact, data localization results in a bigger problem for the manufacturing exports than for the service sectors, as you can see here. So because anyway, manufacturing sectors also rely on services such as logistics and rely in general on cloud services and internet services to pay their employees and to just manage their whole business. And finally, we also analyze the welfare impact and again, the losses are quite significant, and for the EU, they go up to 193 billion US dollars in case of full data localization. I also had a couple of slides on trade policy, which probably I'm gonna spare you. Just the synthesis of these slides is that today we don't have free trade agreements with specifically data localization requirements or data localization commitments of the country to not impose data localization, basically, except the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which was just agreed a few months ago. And this is the first agreement that actually prevents country from imposing data localization. And beside that, we only have some provisions in the GATS and at the WTO level. So yeah, that's all. And yeah, if you have questions on trade policy, then I'm happy to reply to them later on. Thanks.